Hi guys, and welcome back. So today is a Sketch Tuesday, and as you can probably tell, I am working in digital form today, which I love. Just a little bit of information. I am using Photoshop, which is what I always use when I'm using a digital program like this. And the hardware that I'm using is a Wacom Cintiq 13 HD. But yeah, I was really missing sketching in Photoshop. I've done a few intentional finished pieces over the last couple of weeks, but most of my sketching has been traditional for the last while now. And I find that when I'm working digitally, I have a very different mindset when I know what I'm going to do. Like when I have a finished piece or I have a concept that I need to do. Like the last character design one that I had to do. It had a purpose and that was what I was doing. But when I'm sketching, I find that I'm a lot more out of depth with what I'm doing. Like I get lost in it and suddenly there's just I have a hard time making it look good. So I'm trying to figure out how to make my sketching process work better as far as creating pieces that I actually like in the same way that I like the sketches in my sketchbook. So this is kind of a learning experience. It's one that I feel like I've never had a good grasp on as far as how I like my sketches to look when I'm doing digital stuff. So yeah, it's just, I feel like there's a lot for me to still learn. I feel like Photoshop is like the tool that I know. It's the medium that I understand completely. And I feel like I've definitely mastered it to the point that I know how to make it do what I want it to. But there's still so much that I don't know, obviously. And so that's really what I want to get out of working a little bit more when I'm sketching in Photoshop, is just reacquainting myself, but also learning new techniques. So this one specifically, I was really focusing on a softer brush. If you've seen my usual digital pieces, I do not do soft stuff. I like hard lines, so I do line work and I do solid colors and then I add gradients on top of that so that there's color variation. But I don't really use soft brushes for anything other than adding color variation into already blocked in colors. So that's one thing that I'd like to get better at, because overall the style that I like is very graphic, but I don't like feeling limited, because when I do try to use things that are softer, like this kind of general premise of what I'm doing right here, is that I feel like I can't really control it and I can't use it in the way that I want to. So I'm trying to get better at it so that when there's times where I would like to incorporate it into my pieces or do a piece solely that's much more of a painterly approach, I could do it. Because I don't like feeling like that's the restriction, is that I don't know how, so I can't. So yeah, I'm trying to get a little bit more acquainted with using softer, more painterly brushes to build it up from the start rather than as a supplementary one afterwards to add a little bit of variation to it. So yeah, that's kind of really just the basis of this one, is just me wanting to be a little bit more painterly with it and have a little bit more of a process of building it up. And one of my absolute favorite things about working digitally is that it's never set in stone. There's never a point where it's like, I can't manipulate it anymore from this point on. What I mean by that is right here I'm working in basically just a grayscale with darks and lights, and I'm figuring out where I want the shadows to be, which is just me going in there with that soft brush and figuring that out. And I know that because I'm working in Photoshop, I will be able to go in a layer on top of this and add color to this, what I'm working on. And it's just a really nice feeling knowing that I can work on one step at a time and really make sure that I have the values where I want it to be and the line work and the shapes. And then I can work on color. Or if I wanted, I can work on color first. It really opens up a lot of different ways to go about creating the same piece, or different levels that you can create it. So this is kind of different from how I usually do it, because I don't usually do the values first and then the colors on top of the values. I usually kind of do the values and the colors at the same time. So this was I've done this a few times and I've always enjoyed it. So I think I definitely want to be a little bit more conscientious of figuring out the values first and then doing the color on top, because it does really help to be able to get better values first when you're not worrying about color and value as well. But when I was working on this, I knew that I was going to be able to add color. So while I was working on the values, I was thinking, what did I want the colors to look like? Where did I want them? And how did I want that to influence the values themselves? Because that's the one thing when you're working with darks first and then you're adding, well, with the values, and then you're adding the color on top, is that a lot of times when I get to the color, I'll have kind of a different idea of where the values should be, and then suddenly it's like, oh, well, the value's already there, so the color that I'm putting on top doesn't influence that anymore. So basically, I just have to think through where is it going to happen and how is the color going to influence it, and knowing that the color will be darker in the areas that I put the darker values there, which sounds very logical, but once you start working, it makes sense. But the way that I do add color, I'll say this a little bit more practically, is that I'll have all of the darks and the values on one layer. So right here I have this one layer, and then I create another layer on top, and you just change the layer mode to color. And it's that simple. It just changes the color of everything below it. So it keeps the same values, and it just creates it into the color that you paint onto that layer. So at some point I start going in and painting in a pink tone for her skin, and all of the line work and all of the values below it become pink toned. And then I give her like this purple hair, and it influences all the values below it. So it's one of the beauties of Photoshop is the layering effects. But one thing to remember is that you want to make sure and go in and add color variations within the shadows and the highlights, just like you would if you were straight painting. You don't want to leave it so that it's only tonal, so that it only has pink shadows and pink highlights and pink main area. So that was where I had a lot of fun, was I got in the main pink color, but then I went in and added some cooler colors in the shadows, and then I actually did some weird things with like oranges around where her blush would be, and a little bit in the shadow too, which is kind of counterproductive, or not counterproductive, counterintuitive, because usually it's more of a cool color for shadows. So yeah, I just had a lot of fun playing with the placement of the colors with this one. Because the values were already set, I could just go in there and play around with it a lot. But I do really think that where the color didn't have to be both color and value, I was able to get this really soft, ethereal almost look for the colors that I can't really get for a lot of my pieces, or haven't really. And I do think that that really helped. It made it a lot softer, where the colors were no longer tied to that specific value. It wasn't like where the darks were, it was more of a cool color, and where the lights were, it was always more yellow. This is more like the oranges were blending into the reds and areas that were lighter as well as darker. So it gave it this a little bit more of like this blown out look, which I liked. I really liked that look. And I think that it worked well with the softness of where I had the values and the line work, where that was done with a very soft brush. It created this very cohesive look, where that's one thing that I feel like I have struggled with, where I've tried to do more of a soft approach to the line work like I did here, where if I go in with the color in the same way that I do with all my other pieces, where I block it in with a very hard brush, it doesn't look like they match anymore. They have that disconnect. So I think that this is definitely the right approach for me to be able to get the soft look for both the line work and the color, so that they have that harmony together. And the final thing that I do to this piece to finish it all off is I add a texture on top of all of it. And I chose one that has a very uniform texture overall. There's no huge contrast areas or areas that draw the eye immediately to, which I do have some textures like that have big focal points to them. But this one was just kind of smooth and gentle all around, and I added it over the top, and I think that I set it to overlay, and I dropped the opacity down. And I love the effect that it has on pieces like this, where it just brings all of it together with that one cohesive texture, and it just creates this really beautiful softness to it, a little bit more of a texture, and I like that. I want to use more textures digitally. I used to do it a lot more, and I've kind of pulled away from it for a while, but I want to get back into it because I do like the effect it has. And that's everything for today's sketching video. I really like the softness of it, and that I pushed myself in that direction. So I do think that I learned a lot from this piece, and I know what I want to work on more as I do more digital sketching. So I feel really happy with that. But if you guys want to help support me, I do have a link down in the description, as well as in the end card, that'll take you to my art shop, where you can buy buttons and prints and originals from me. And I will have another video coming out next, which will be on Thursday, and that's pretty much it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys at my next one.